What's happening, y'all? It's your boy Heru. Those that know me best know that I've been screaming on the top of the digital rooftops about Final Fantasy XVI. Final Fantasy is one of my favorite franchises in all of gaming, and I've been playing video games for a mighty long time. Going back to when I was 4 years old, I played all the legendary Square Enix games, or Squaresoft games. It was called Squaresoft back then before the merger with Enix, right? And I played, Final Fantasy 1 through 15, including many of the non-mainline titles like, Mobius Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, Final Fantasy Tactics, World of Final Fantasy. I mean, there's been so many non-mainline great Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy, Strangers, and Paradise, so many of them, right? And I've also played a lot of the old school ones like Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, Mario RPG, Parasite Eve, Mana series, aka Secret of Mana, Sword of Mana, Trials of Mana, etc., right? So I know what a great Final Fantasy entails, but at the same time, a proper Final Fantasy means multiple different things depending on who you ask. Ultimately, it's subjective. Personally, my definition of a great Final Fantasy is similar to Yoshida's definition. You need to have the best story, you need to have the best graphics, you need to have the best battle system, you need to have a lot of content, you need to have chocobos, you need to have Moogles, you need to have great sound, and if you're missing even one of them, the fans will hate you forever. With that being said, let's get into why I'm so supportive of this new Final Fantasy, and how this will be the greatest Final Fantasy that we've seen in over a decade, if not one of the greatest Final Fantasies ever, and I mean ever. No Capsule Corp. So let's start off with the combat, right? And the combat is a high risk, high reward for Square Enix, right? It can go either way with them. A lot of folks have been whining about it. When Final Fantasy XVI was first shown to the public, there was a lot of pushback from certain sectors of the base. The Final Fantasy purists, and I'm using air quotes when I say Final Fantasy purists, were saying stuff like it's too dark, where's the vibrant environments? This ain't Final Fantasy, you can only play with one character. It's too dark and depressing and gritty. Versus 13, hold my beer. There was a lot of criticisms fans had for the showcasing of FF16 during the State of Play years ago, right? However, as time has went on, fans are finally starting to warm up to Final Fantasy XVI. And every showcasing, especially the State of Play, fans are finally starting to become convinced that this is going to be the Final Fantasy for the ages. It's finally coming into its own. Yoshida made it very clear during his PAX East and even the Sony State of Play that if you don't want to deal with the game's combat, there's a story-focused mode and accessories that can push you through the content quicker. Creative Business Unit 3 knew fully well that the backlash and the complaints would be prominent, aka the loud minority, right? God, Twitter, ugh. Aka the loudest person in the room. Usually the brokest. But nonetheless, they prepped for any and damn near all challenges from any OG Final Fantasy fan saying the game isn't for them for X, Y, and Z member berries reasons, right? But since we're talking about the member berries, this whole scenario is very similar to a little game. I'm sure y'all have heard of this particular game I'm talking about, right? It's Final Fantasy VII. But at one point, many of the OG Final Fantasy fans who love the high fantasy D&D-esque Final Fantasy were not too keen on the idea of Final Fantasy going into more of a sci-fi, steampunk, cyberpunk, brainpunk-esque aesthetic, and ultimately wanted to reject Square's new take on Final Fantasy. But despite that, it opened Final Fantasy to a whole new passionate audience that has stood with Square since the inception of Final Fantasy VII. Despite the lackluster FF installments that came after the 90s, Final Fantasy VII would grow to be the biggest selling Final Fantasy in the history of the franchise, and nothing to this very day has topped it since. But many came close, and the ones that did come close were also series norm departures like Final Fantasy X, as well as Final Fantasy XV, one that challenged Square to make a fully realized open world game, but whether they achieve their goals is definitely up for debate. But one thing is for certain, subverting expectations and taking risks has benefited Square far more than not. In other words, the Final Fantasy games that received the greatest shakeups were the ones that granted Square the greatest payoffs as well, and in turn helped to redefine what a Final Fantasy can be, and all for the better. Game sales alone speak for themselves. And speaking of game sales, Breath of the Wild, the entire series' top-selling entry in the series with a whopping 29 million. It was the best-selling Zelda game of all time. And let's not even bring up its list of awards it received. And of course, with Resident Evil 4 being huge, in contrast to prior entries in the series, it ended up outselling all the Resident Evil games that came before it, and even managed to expand the fan base immensely. It's obvious that this Final Fantasy has been the most divisive installment in the series in years, and it was an uphill battle getting the masses to finally see this game for what it ultimately became, a massive Game of the Year contender that'll even give Zelda a run for its money. Not to mention Spiderman 2, a game that many have been slinging webs with their peens to, right? A lot of folks have been jerking off this Spider-Man. Oh my god, Spider-Man 2! That new trailer, what's the trailer? It's gonna change the game, it's gonna change the industry, it's gonna change everything, it's gonna change life, it's gonna cure cancer, it's gonna cure, cataracts, it's gonna cure HIV, it's gonna cure everything, right? It's gonna cure COVID, just like that. Stop. So trust, I have no doubts this game, based on the state of play and PAX East showcasing that this game will be one of the greatest, one of the biggest selling highly awarded Final Fantasies in series history. It just goes to show that taking calculated risks in life can pay off in ways that'll surprise you. With Sony's state of play showcasing the gorgeous environments that are so vast in Final Fantasy XVI, I'm at a point now that open worlds moving forward are unnecessary. With zone-based format, it goes to show that you don't necessarily need to put the whole team through the strenuous process of making an open world just for the sake of an open world when you can have vast open zones like this. It's not open world, nor is it linear. It's in the nice sweet spot that many other dev teams can take and learn from. The zones are so vast that it creates the illusion that it is a giant open world. You feel like you're exploring an open world when you're not. And that ultimately is what matters. Yoshida even said in an interview with Famitsu magazine, "I believe it is practically impossible to ask for everything. If we had a development period of 15 years, we may have had the opportunity of challenging ourselves with an open world. After all, it's almost impossible in terms of time and cost to create a global story within an open world." Those that understand video game development knows exactly what he's talking about. And at the end of the day, what's the point of an open world when majority of it is barren as fuck due to certain limitations within the development process? There's been major rumblings pertaining to the infamous interview with Yoshida, being asked why there's no black folks or people of color in the new Final Fantasy XVI. And he did the best of his ability to explain the reason behind there being a lack of diversity. He says, end quote, "It fits the isolated nature of this realm," he said, "as well as the inspiration of medieval Europe. Ultimately, we felt that while incorporating ethnic diversity into Valisthea was important, and over-incorporation into the single corner of a much larger world could end up causing a violation of those narrative boundaries. We originally set for ourselves, the story we are telling is fantasy, yes, but is also rooted in reality. Further, it can be challenging to assign distinctive ethnicities to either antagonists or protagonists, without triggering audience preconceptions, inviting unwarranted speculation, and ultimately stoking flames of controversy. In the end, we simply want the focus to be less on the outward appearance of our characters and more on who they are as people. People who are complex and diverse in their natures, backgrounds, beliefs, personalities, motivations, people whose stories we can resonate with. There is diversity in Valisthea, diversity that, while not all-encompassing, is synergistic with the setting we've created and is true to the inspirations from which we are drawing. Now, for those who don't know, I pride myself in being a socially conscious black male who has delved deep into the plight of black society in America as well as the globe. History is key, so when it comes to discussions like this, you can make the argument that, hey, Bethesda did their due diligence and added the Red Guard in the Elder Scrolls series to pay homage to black Moors who came to Europe in year 711 AD and dominated for centuries. There's all sorts of Moorish-related remnants of the past that are still in Spain to this very day. You could easily make that argument, but we gotta remember, we're dealing with Japanese developers, and unless there's a Black American, West Indian, or a brother from the UK who can guide Creative Business Unit 3 in terms of how to properly depict Black North African Islamic males from that time period, it could come off as insulting and patronizing. I also wouldn't like it if they made the token black male character the token black man who ends up being the goofy minstrel show-esque comic relief, nor do I want the big burly blaxploitation movie / Mandingo warrior gorilla proportioned black token caricature either. So ultimately, Creative Business Unit 3 made the right choice. My thing is, either depict us properly or don't do it at all, and honestly I'm glad Square chose option 2. I actually respect them even more for that. It's better to keep it safe as opposed to half-baking it, and you end up pleasing no one anyway. I want folks to understand that black folks were in Europe during the medieval times, and it is well documented. It's definitely a touchy subject as a whole, and I'm sure it was super awkward for Yoshida to have to explain away why they chose to play it safe with the race of said characters. I will say that if Square chooses to challenge themselves and have a fully diverse cast for Final Fantasy XVII, and the characters are not just parodies of their own cultures and folklore from respective societies, that'd be gas. You gotta give Square their flowers at the end of the day, because what the devs have accomplished here can only be done with the power of the PlayStation 5.
We love you, Sony. The power of the PlayStation 5.
I know what you're thinking.
Hey bro, my PC can do that and then some.
Alright, I hear you, bro. I hear you, bro. But let's not forget that Square has an exclusivity deal with Sony for 6 months to a year. But even that is questionable, because here with Game Informer, they asked Yoshida about a PC version of the game. While it sounds like it's on the way, he stresses that it will be longer than 6 months before players see or even possibly hear about a PC port. I'm guessing he mentioned 6 months because of the aforementioned exclusivity window. But he reiterates that this window expiring does not mean the PC version of Final Fantasy XVI will go live then or anytime soon. So for now, and presumably quite a while after this game's release, if you want to play Final Fantasy XVI, you'll need a PS5. So for you PC Master Race bros, y'all gonna have to hold off on that PC big dick energy exertion. Yoshi P wants to prioritize optimization similar to how Final Fantasy XV's Windows Edition. They want the PC experience to be fully realized and not a half-ass port, right? We've gotten a lot of half-ass ports over the years. Let's keep it a stack. But honestly, if I was y'all, I'm gonna keep it 100 with y'all. If I was y'all, I would just grab a PS5, man. Just grab a PS5 and you thank me later. You know, just send me, DM me or tweet to me or whatever you can do and say, look, Heru, thank you so much for putting me on the PlayStation 5. Because if it wasn't for you, I would still be on the PC waiting my ass off for FF16 when I could have just played it early on, had a great time. Y'all already know what time it is, yeah? Let's be honest, as I said in the last segment, Final Fantasy XVI will not be this big blockbuster hit at first. Even the homie Yoshida admits in a recent interview, end quote, I can tell you that I wouldn't want to look at the first week sales for Final Fantasy XVI. Honestly, I happen to concur. As big of a fan as I am of Final Fantasy XVI, it's gonna be a sleeper hit. It's the kind of game that'll do big numbers throughout the year, but it's not breaking any major records within the first week or anything like that. Within the same interview, Yoshida says, end quote, so our policy at Creative Business Unit 3 here is that at the very least, create a game where you yourself thinks it's interesting and make the game earn in black numbers. Japanese word meaning profit. Loss of profit is red numbers, even if it's just a little. By doing so, we will still get money and we'll be able to work on the games we like or things that we think are interesting. So I think this time, well, if I think this wouldn't work out, I'd actually go and destroy these projects myself. Like, I'm sorry, this is impossible, and then work on other projects to supplement it. And yeah, I would tell them to cancel this project. I've already done this numerous times throughout my career, but still, yeah. Since I can't turn back this time when it comes to creating this game, I told them that we'll try to sell it all out. So allow me to put this amount of budget I need for this game. The answer I got from them was, yeah, do your best. So yeah. But then I've been generating profits from Final Fantasy XIV anyway, and managed to contribute a lot to the company. And it was thanks to the Warriors of Light that made it happen. So it was hard for the company to say no to what I proposed, I assume. So with that being said, it's pretty obvious that Square trusts Yoshida. They believe in his vision. They're like, you know what, this guy's making mad bread with the 14 expansions. I mean, how can we say no? I mean, he's our guy. It's tried and proven. I mean, this guy's that guy. He's that. So why would we turn him down on this? There's nobody else. You know, Nomura's focused on the 7 remake trilogy and Kingdom Hearts 4. So it makes all the sense in the world. Now 16 will definitely review within the 9s or high 8s at the bare minimum. And it'll receive some accolades for its merits, but sales will be another story. Unless it gets Game of the Year, in which case sales will be significantly boosted off that alone. Final Fantasy XVI was definitely a passion project, y'all, from the good homie Yoshida. And Square trusted him and his team enough to fund this particular project. You know, this reminds me of the passion project from the creator of the Final Fantasy franchise, Hironobu Sakaguchi, with his most recent project, Fantasian. This VVS diamond of a game was not only critically acclaimed, but it was one of the most unique turn-based RPGs that I've played in years. The only downside for me was that it was a mobile exclusive. But other than that, I absolutely adored the game's world, characters, narrative, etc. Like, that game was the full package. I mean, even the love interest, yeah, like 2 waifus. I mean, hell, it's all there. No excuses. You know, Fantasian was slept on, for sure. It was a fantastic game, for sure. And I believe I'll get that exact same feeling, that feeling of curiosity. You know, that feeling of just wanting to learn more about the world, just unravel its secrets, unravel its mysteries, you know. I don't really get that feeling from a lot of games these days. Time for a little rant, yo. It's time for a little rant, because, you know, y'all been wilding out on Twitter. What I find hilarious when it comes to a disturbing portion of the Final Fantasy fandom these days is that you got folks who are psychotic enough to actually prey on Final Fantasy XVI's downfall. Many of these individuals are bigging up Final Fantasy VII as a definitive Final Fantasy experience, and everything that came after it, even before it really, is inferior by comparison, which is absolutely laughable to me. You guys don't seem to understand that if this game fails, if Final Fantasy XVI fails, you're essentially telling Square, hey guys, hey Square, I haven't had enough member berries. Give me another hit of that nostalgia, baby. All that's gonna happen, y'all, is we're gonna get a bunch of spin-offs, remasters, or remakes of previously established Final Fantasy games. And once that cow's so heavily milked that it's putting out powder, y'all done milked the cow so goddamn much, it's putting out. Y'all want to complain to Square that they're not putting out any new and fresh worlds or ideas when y'all were the ones who set the precedent for this current scenario to begin with. Remember, folks, you vote with your dollar at the end of the day. And look, I get it. Some of y'all wanted something similar to what Final Fantasy Versus 13 was, right? Y'all wanted like a fantasy based on reality with a modern aesthetic, with a dash of sci-fi. I get it, and Final Fantasy VII provides that in a lot of ways, right? I completely get it. But we gotta remember, Final Fantasy started off with a high fantasy medieval setting. and we're literally going back to the roots of the franchise with 16. What? There's no waifus for you to collect? What? There's no Tifa? What? There's no Aerith? There's no Renoa? There's no Yuna? Where's my waifus? I get it, okay? But we got Jill. We got sexy ass Benedicta. And sure, you know, the art style and their designs may not be as soft or as waifu-y as the aforementioned Final Fantasies, but these new female characters aren't ugly either. Even though fans have whined endlessly about their designs, like, oh my god, she looks hideous, or they look strong in the face, the chisel jaw. Like, I disagree. Like, I mean, sure, it's, again, like, it's not as soft, right? You don't have the anime eyes, the glossy, you know, anime eyes. You don't have a lot of aspects to them that's really, like, super soft and gentle, which I get. You know, we all want it. We all want that. We all want the baby girl, the Yuna, Tifa, Aerith archetypes. We love that stuff. I understand. But not every single love interest or female protagonist needs to necessarily have that particular aesthetic to them, right? They don't have to be that archetype all the time. And I think, you know, when it comes to Final Fantasy, you know, 7 really set the standard of what a female protagonist or love interest should be. Because nobody really likes Lightning like that. I don't f*** Lightning. Oh, I couldn't stand her. You know, I think that Creative Business Unit 3 chose this path because they wanted the story to have a very serious tone. And, you know, having a super sexy love interest with a revealing outfit may be distracting for the player and may take away from the serious tone of the story. Either way, there's plenty of other games available to you, like Genshin Impact and Honkai, Star Rail, and, you know, there's a ton of them. There's Tower Fantasy, if you're into that. There's so many of them that should give you your, you know, waifu collecting, deviant or deviant art, hentai consuming fix. You'll get it from those games, but sure. This Final Fantasy needs to succeed for the sake of creativity and brand authenticity, y'all. Yoshida is definitely not too pressed over pre-orders, like many publications will have you believe. End quote. When it comes to pre-orders, anyone can pre-order whenever they want these days, and not many would do so. So sales-wise, we'll look at the first week to see how many have purchased the game digitally as well as from wholesale dealers. So the sellout starts there, and the rest will be predictions. How much the game has reached the hands of gamers, so predictions will be made. So we'll use those detailed data in advance and create a simulation. The reason is because we'll have proof at hand on how much copies have reached the players. Yoshida understands, y'all, that pre-orders no longer hold the same weight they used to hold at one point, because gamers have been burned far too many times in the past, i.e. Cyberpunk 2077. No one wants to be the next Cyberpunk, so studios and publishers are holding off on overexposing their games until said game is close to a solidified release date, which is why there was a period of radio silence from Creative Business Unit 3 when it came to Final Fantasy XVI news. CBU3 is more concerned about how many players will buy the game in the first week, and they're analyzing that with realistic expectations, which is something that a lot of these studios do not have. It's kind of like the movie industry, right? Where everything has to do $1 billion in like the first week or like the first month. It has to do $1 billion, and if a movie doesn't reach $1 billion, then it's a flop, it's a failure. Not saying that a lot of these movies are not hitting $1 billion, but $1 billion shouldn't be the standard. You know what I mean? I think $1 billion should be applauded. It's wonderful, incredible, but it shouldn't be something that's like, this is the standard for success, and anything below that is a flop, it's a failure, it's garbage. You know? I just want to end off by saying this. This is my Final Fantasy. And look, this is coming from a guy whose first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy VII. I loved and cherished that game as it generated my love for Japanese RPGs. It's what set me on this journey of playing other great Japanese RPGs, right? And we're not going to use JRPG. We're not going to try to make it a thing because that's a pejorative now, in case y'all didn't know. Just saying. Yeah, Yoshida said it later. RPGs like the Tales series, Legend of Heroes, Ys series, Persona series, Chrono series, Chaos Rings, Legend of Dragoon, Grandia, the Xeno series, and many, 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 many more that are mostly Square titles that I've played a lot of. Japanese-made RPGs like Final Fantasy XVI is a much needed departure of the series' genre's norm. After a while, you get tired of the same old tropes being implemented in the same exact manner, right? Over and over and over again. And I think the Tales series is criminal for that, right? They kind of reuse the exact same tropes over and over again. The same pure of heart protagonist, the same old baby girl who's oblivious, the same protagonist who was oblivious to female attraction and girls flirting to them and this and that, right? I think FF16 being rated M for mature, we can finally get away from the samey shonen tropes that we've grown accustomed to and finally get a little taste of that seinen change, you know? We need some seinen, and this is why folks love Chainsaw Man, even though it's shonen, but it feels like a seinen manga, right, or anime. Same thing with Berserk and many others, you know, Guilty Crown. I mean, we love that hard body, darker tone. We get tired of the same old friendship and love can conquer everything. This is a game that starts off as a revenge story, but as our gallant protagonist Clive progresses in his journey, he gains companions who allow him to see the bigger picture. Valicia, a world of mysteries such as the scattered ruins of high society that mysteriously fell, as well as the icons. Where do they come from? What are they? There's so many questions that I cannot wait to find out the answers to. The combat is the primary thing that many have been skeptical about, but let's be clear. You got the man, the myth, the legend, Suzuki, who is known for producing the highest quality action battle systems to this day. Marvel vs. Capcom 2. That game remains goated to this day. So whether the combat will live up to the hype, I think his resume speaks for itself. And let's be clear, there's still going to be folks who dislike this game no matter how great it is, due to the member berries, or what I like to call nostalgia junkies. Which is funny because this particular Final Fantasy has far more member berries attached to it than any Final Fantasy we've seen in years. But hey, the combat though, the combat, I don't like the DMC series. I like the turn-based combat. It's so much better. It's just simple. I don't have to like. Action combat scares me. Some people are just nostalgia junkies and refuse to get treatment, which is why fandoms such as the Zelda series who hate on Breath of the Wild, or the Resident Evil series who hate on Resident Evil 4, or heck, let's be honest, I wouldn't be surprised to be frank, but there's probably some folks from the Mario fandom who are not too fond of the shift to 3D with Mario 64. I have heard people who actually hate the 3D Mario games and prefer the 2D mechanics. At the end of the day, you will always have people who are fearful of change, and it's somewhat understandable because humans are creatures of habit. But some things need to evolve in order to expand and grow. With this Final Fantasy, no, my Final Fantasy, which is so familiar yet so radically different. Such a change will not only pay off greatly in the end, but it will allow the series to reach such a vast audience and reach heights we never thought the series would ever reach since the dark ages of Square in the 2010s, and that was yikes. Sometimes change is good. Now let's make Final Fantasy great again.
I just wanna be somebody, be all